Robb Stark stood by the carved window of Riverrun, the bitter wind from the west rolling in like a warning. The room behind him was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of parchment or the dull crackle from the hearth. Grey Wind, his direwolf, lay near the fire, eyes half closed but ears twitching. There was war in every direction, and war, Robb had learned, cost more than blood. It cost gold, and gold they didn't have. That was why the letter on the table behind him hadn't been burned yet. It came sealed in black wax, the sigil of a faceless man engraved in silver. The Iron Bank of Braavos, cold, calculated, ancient, and terrifyingly precise. They rarely made offers, and never twice, and now one had come for him. "Your Grace," Catelyn said gently, stepping into the room. She looked worn, the kind of tired that seeped into the bones. "You've been quiet since the raven came." He turned slowly, rubbing a thumb across his chin. "They offered a loan, Mother. Gold. Enough to pay 10,000 swords. Enough to equip 20,000 more. Food, horses, siege engines. All of it." She frowned, unease in her eyes. "But at what cost? The Iron Bank doesn't invest. It owns. When their debts are called, kingdoms fall." Robb nodded. "And yet, I'm already at war with Lannisters, surrounded by houses who call themselves allies only until it's inconvenient. My bannermen grumble. I've lost the phrase. I have no sons, no heir. I need leverage, and the bank offers it." "It's dangerous," Catelyn said, her voice low. "They will expect repayment, no matter who wears the crown." Robb turned back to the window. "Which is why I must make sure it's me." By moonlight, he signed the agreement. Within 3 moons, gold flooded the north. Ships arrived. At White Harbor bearing crates of arms, sealed barrels of Braavosi steel, and contracts inked in languages half his council couldn't read. Mercenaries, well-paid and ruthless, spilled across the land wearing the direwolf sigil on their cloaks. 1,000 sellswords from Essos pledged themselves to Robb Stark, not out of loyalty, but coin. The Golden Company itself said to never break a contract, sent word of interest. A Stark would finally be able to play like a Lannister, and better. News reached King's Landing faster than expected. Cersei was the first to lose sleep. Tywin Lannister understood instantly what it meant. The North now had gold that wasn't theirs, and the Iron Bank had taken a side. Westeros had just been placed on a Braavosi ledger, and they weren't on top. Robb's first move came swift. Harrenhal, left lightly guarded by Lannister forces, was taken by his new siege masters in just 3 days. The Riverlands rose again. A Tully banner flew once more. Then came the Bolton reversal. Gold bought silence, and then betrayal. Roose Bolton swore loyalty once more, with 1,000 Northmen at his back. Quietly, the Red Wedding was erased from possibility before it was ever planned. The Iron Bank kept its distance, as always. But its agents were watching, and Westeros was beginning to notice something far more terrifying than the young wolves. Army. He had resources. He had momentum. He had a plan. But more than all, he had debt. And debt, especially to the Iron Bank, always has a price. The ravens flew from Riverrun like black arrows across the sky, each bearing the same message sealed in gray wax. A call to arms, not just to battermen of the North and Riverlands, but to the disillusioned, the betrayed, and the hungry. Robb Stark's letter did not beg, and it did not flatter. It promised gold, justice, and vengeance, and that was enough. In the Vale, young Lord Robin Arryn stared blankly at the letter while Petyr Baelish read it aloud. Littlefinger's mouth curled slightly at the corners when he saw the Iron Bank sigil. "Interesting," he muttered, more to himself than to the boy. "The wolf grows fangs of coin now." The Lannisters may finally have met their match. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister held the same letter in his hands, but his eyes didn't blink. He read it 3 times. Then slowly, he placed it down and looked at the council with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than rage. "We underestimated him," he said, "and worse, we ignored Braavos." Cersei, already unnerved by the whisper of mercenaries in the Westerlands, crossed her arms tightly. "He's still a boy, and you have a kingdom." Tywin looked at her like she'd spoken nonsense. "No, I have a debt-ridden throne and a war we cannot afford. He has investors." Meanwhile, Robb stood at the front of his growing camp in Seaguard. The banners flapped in the sea, Windhouse Mormont, Reed, Blackwood, even some Hightower men from Oldtown who had turned coats after being promised trade rights. And for the first time since his father died, Robb felt something dangerous stir. In his gut, confidence. He walked among the foreign soldiers camped outside the keep. Men from Tyrosh, Myr, Eden Volantis. They bowed or nodded as he passed. They didn't love him. They didn't know the North. But they respected the coin behind his banner. And respect, Robb thought, would do for now. Catelyn remained wary. These. Sel's words, what happens when they're asked to fight against their own? She whispered one night, as they stood overlooking the torchlit valley of tents. Robb's voice was steady. They won't be. I'll give them Lannisters to kill. Plenty of them. But it was more than just swords he was buying. The Iron Bank had sent men silent advisors who worked in the shadows, organizing supply chains, redirecting trade routes, freezing crown assets where they could. By the time Winter's breath touched the neck, several Lannister-aligned houses were already bankrupt. Caravans bound for King's Landing mysteriously never arrived, and gold shipments from Casterly Rock were delayed, sometimes vanished entirely. The war wasn't just being fought with blades anymore. It was being fought in ledgers. And in the shadows of this new battlefield, Varys whispered. "The young wolf has teeth now," he told Tyrion in the capital. "And he's learning to bite where it hurts." Tyrion downed a goblet of wine, his eyes tired. "He's not just playing the game, is he? He's rewriting the board, but not all was going well. The cost of this golden army was immense. Every step forward came with an interest rate. Every siege supplied by Braavos came with paperwork. Even in victory, the Iron Bank's shadow lingered behind Robb's every decision. The more ground he gained, the more he owed. And Braavos, they never forgot. In a council meeting, Lord Karstark finally said aloud what others whispered. "We're winning the war, aye. But who are we winning it for?" Robb didn't flinch. "For the North. For my father's justice." But in his chest, a cold knot formed. Because the truth was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. The Iron Bank didn't take sides. They took payments. And someday, when the war was done and the lion was dead, the wolf would have to turn around and face the ones who gave him the crown and ask what they wanted next. Winter crept into the bones of the Riverlands as Robb Stark's war machine pushed south. Snow kissed the rooftops of recaptured towns, and iron-shod boots left tracks over frosted roads. Yet even with winter falling, the Wolf King advanced back. By a force the Seven Kingdoms had never seen before, a marriage of northern honor and Braavosi finance. And while the people cheered, the old lords began to whisper. Some didn't like how fast things were changing. In the hall of Harrenhal, now Robb's southern base, a war council convened. The air was thick with heat from the braziers and tension, from sharp words. Lord Karstark sat opposite Robb, his gaze hard. "We are drowning in gold we don't own," he growled. "Your father fought for justice. Are we fighting for balance sheets now?" Robb didn't look away. "We fight, to win, and we cannot win with pride alone. But southwards? Karstark's voice rose. Ships from Essos? Spies from Braavos whispering in our war tent like they belong? Catelyn tried to interject, but Robb held up a hand. Those spies, he said coolly, just cut off a Lannister supply route from Fair Isle. You're eating because of them. The room fell quiet. Then Blackfish Tully leaned forward. It's not the foreign coin that concerns me, Robb. It's that we are being watched. Always watched. He was right. Robb felt it too. The Ironbank's envoys never spoke unless spoken to. They dressed plainly, avoided attention, but they were always there. And when he made decisions, he could feel their gaze in the room, as though every choice he made was being tallied, scored, and weighed. The war shifted dramatically after the fall of Harrenhal. Braavosi engineers designed siege weapons that turned the tide at Stony Sept. Gold paid for Blackmon assassins who eliminated Lannister scouts before they could warn Casterly Rock. Letters reached Dorne with promises, incentives pressure. Some of the southern lords began to sway, not out of loyalty, but fear. Fear of being the last to back the winning side. Robb's most daring move came next, a march toward King's Landing, not to take the capital, but to cut off its supply. Chains and encircle it in a stranglehold of fire and famine. He wouldn't storm the city. He'd starve it. At the gates of Maiden Pool, he sent an envoy, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, with an offer of mercy in exchange for surrender. The town bent the knee within a day. Robb treated its people with care. Word spread fast. But inside King's Landing, panic brewed. Cersei screamed at the small council. Where is the crown's gold? Why hasn't the Iron Bank answered our ravens? Tyrion replied calmly, sipping from his cup. Because they're no longer lending to us. We are not profitable. Joffrey slammed a fist on the table. Then take what's left from this. People, Varys tilted his head. You may find there's not much left to take. The wolves have teeth. Your grace in very long pockets. Back at Harrenhal, Robb received a private visit. The envoy from the Iron Bank was waiting in his. Solar, pale, quiet, calm. You are close to victory, the man said without smiling. But we must discuss the terms of repayment. When the war is won, the Iron Bank expects priority over crown debts, land agreements, and trade routes. Robb stared at him. You expect me to sell Westeros to repay gold? The man blinked. Not sell. Lease. Govern. Partner. That word chilled Robb more than the snow outside. Partner. Was this what his war had become? A kingdom built on credit, loyalty replaced with contracts? Later that night, he stood alone on the battlements of Harrenhal. Grey wind paced beside him. Below, the fires of the camp burned, mercenaries laughed. Blackwood and Mormont men sharpened swords, and Braavosi merchants made notes in their books. He had power, more than he'd ever imagined. But somewhere along the road, had he already lost his kingdom? And worse, was it even his anymore? Snow blanketed the King's Road as Robb Stark's forces crept ever closer to King's Landing. The once golden road was now churned with mud and blood, a frozen artery of war. Villages that once sang songs of harvest now whispered rumors of the Iron Wolf, the king who bought his army in Braavos and paid for every victory with his soul. Inside the walls of the capital, winter brought hunger, and hunger brought anger. Bread riots broke out in Flea Bottom. Gold cloaks cracked skulls in the streets. Rumors spread like wildfire that the Iron Bank had turned its back on the crown and now backed Robb Stark. Some even claimed Tywin Lannister had secretly fled to Casterly Rock, others that he'd fallen ill and was kept hidden by his family. Cersei's fury grew every day. Her council shrank with each defeat. Lords once loyal to the Lion were now suspiciously absent from meetings. They were calculating, watching the tides shift. The smell of rot lingered, not just from the dying city, but from the rotting foundation of House Lannister's power. In the north, Lady Mage Mormont wrote her daughter Lyanna, "He is winning, but I no longer recognize the boy I followed into war. His eyes are colder, his words sharper. There is something hollow behind them, as if each day he spends near Braavosi gold chips away at his father's spirit inside him." But Robb didn't stop. Every move was surgical, calculated. A new Braavosi fleet blockaded Cracklaw Point, cutting off any shipments from the narrow sea. Lord Tarley, once a Lannister loyalist, switched sides after his coffers mysteriously recovered from a theft that had bankrupted him weeks earlier. Robb's court grew larger, and stranger diplomats from Lys, cartographers from Pentos, a silent red priestess from Shai, who refused to speak unless spoken to, always staring at Robb like she saw something beneath his skin. He didn't like her, but she came with Iron Bank approval, and that meant she stayed. Robb visited the dungeons of Harrenhal often now, not to punish, but to question. Braavosi agents taught him things, how to extract information not with cruelty, but with promises, how to twist a traitor's mind until they turned on themselves. Justice, once the Stark family's proudest virtue, now seemed negotiable. The worst blow came when word reached him that House Frey had finally allied with the Lannisters. In response, Robb ordered a quiet campaign, one not of open war, but of economic ruin. Frey lands were stripped of supply lines. Traders paid in counterfeit coin. Mercenaries posing as loyalists burned the Frey granaries and blamed it on wildlings. Within weeks, the twins were begging for help, and Robb offered none. His mother noticed the change in him more than anyone. She confronted him late one night as snow fell against the glass of the war room. "You're winning, Robb," she said, "but not as your father's son." He didn't look up from his maps. "That's because my father's way got him executed." "That may be," Catelyn whispered, voice cracking, "but his soul didn't belong to anyone else." He paused, then pushed a marker across the table, positioning it outside King's Landing. "I'm not building a future, Mother," he said quietly. "I'm buying one." 2 days later, his army reached the outskirts of the capital, and the city, starving, fractured, betrayed, did something no one expected. It opened its gates, not out of love, not out of loyalty, but because the people feared what would happen if they didn't. They had survived mad kings, usurpers, foreign queens, but never had they seen a king like Robb Stark, one who never needed to sit the throne to rule it. As he entered the Red Keep with Grey Wind at his side, mercenaries flanking him like shadows, no one cheered, no one cried. The silence was louder than any welcome. He passed the Iron Throne, didn't even look at it. Instead, he turned to the Yaw, Iron Bank's envoy, waiting by the steps, and said, "Tell Braavos, their investment has arrived." The Red Keep had never felt colder, and not because of the winter winds slithering through its ancient stone halls. It was the silence. No celebration, no ringing bells, no feast, just the heavy footsteps of foreign guards patrolling the corridors, and the constant scratching of Braavosi scribes tallying, listing, and claiming. Robb Stark sat in the small council chamber, though half the seats were empty. The others were filled by strangers' iron-eyed men from Braavos in dull gray cloaks, a Tyroshi trademaster, and a Westerosi banker named Carlo, who now called himself Advisor of Revenue and Debt Fulfillment. Even the Grand Maester had been quietly replaced with a man fluent in High Valyrian and Braavosi contract law. Across the chamber, Lord Varys offered a careful bow. "Your Grace," he said, voice. "Silk-wrapped poison. King's Landing accepts your rule. The people may be quiet now, but they prefer a silent king to a mad one." Robb gave a faint nod. "I didn't come for their love. I came to end the war." "Indeed," Varys said smoothly. though it seems you may have only changed the name of the master, not the whip." Robb didn't respond, because he was beginning to think the same. It wasn't the throne that felt heavy. It was the Iron Bank's breath on the back of his neck. Every order he gave had to be balanced against repayment. Every judgment passed through a quiet look from a Braavosi clerk. They weren't advisors. They were auditors with swords. Cersei Lannister had been captured during the city's fall. She now sat in the black cells beneath the keep, a far cry from the queen's chambers she once ruled. Robb visited her just once. She looked up at him, bruised but unbroken. "So the bastard boy sits the throne," she sneered. "And what now? Will the wolf bark, or is he muzzled by his bankers?" Robb said nothing at first. Then, in a low voice, "Your father taught me something." He never said it aloud, but I understood. Power is never earned. It's bought. And I've paid. Cersei laughed, hollow and cracked. "Oh, you sweet child. You've only made the down payment. The real cost comes later, when you try to rule." And she was right. Robb tried. He tried to restore order, to rebuild roads, to protect the starving in the streets. But every coin spent had to be approved, every mercy delayed by paperwork, every promise from the war days returned with interest. Even Sansa's arrival didn't soften his new rule. She came from the Vale, escorted by a cold-eyed pettier Baelish who claimed neutrality, but his smile said otherwise. Sansa embraced her brother, but pulled away quickly. "You don't look like him anymore," she whispered. "Who?" "Father." It stung deeper than a blade. Grey Wind paced more now, restless. He didn't like the castle, didn't like the new faces, the copper scent of falsehood that filled the air. The direwolf had grown distant, like he didn't recognize the man he protected. And maybe, Robb thought, he shouldn't. He'd once fought for justice, for the North, for honor. But he had traded those for siege engines, for mercenaries, for the Braavosi fleet. He had won the war, but peace never came. Because the Iron Bank didn't want peace. Peace slowed profit. Peace meant fewer contracts, less fear. Robb now found himself signing treaties that ceded shipping lanes to Braavos, giving tax rights over ports to distant men who'd never stepped foot in Westeros. Noble houses grumbled. Some began to pull back their support. A quiet resistance began to form not behind Lannister banners, but Stark ones. Old wolves who didn't recognize their king anymore. Then the message came, from Braavos, a formal demand. "Interest has not been met. Collateral will be collected." Robb stared at the parchment. He read it 5 times. The seal was real. The wording was final. And the worst part? He didn't know what collateral they meant. Had he signed away parts of Westeros itself? Were they coming for lands or lords or names? The war was over, but a new one had begun. One fought not with blades, but clauses. Not with soldiers, but debt collectors. And Robb Stark, the king in the capital, realized something far worse. And defeat. He may have won the 7 kingdoms, but he had sold them to do it. Snow fell heavier now, thick enough to choke banners and silence horns. Winter had arrived in full across Westeros, but inside the Red Keep, a different kind of storm gathered. Whispers grew in corners. Ravens flew in secret. And Robb Stark, now draped in silks paid for by Braavos, walked halls more silent than any battlefield. The Iron Bank's envoys had grown bolder. No longer content to remain in shadows, they now sat beside his council as equals, sometimes speaking over his northern lords, as if they weren't even there. Their turns became commands, their warnings veiled threats, and the most recent demand chilled Robb to his bones. Winterfell. The letter was short, the Braavosi way plain ink, formal tone. To satisfy ongoing debts and honor contractual clauses within the Braavosi Agreement of Alliance and Mutual Victory. The Iron Bank requests full access to Winterfell and its surrounding mineral-rich territories, including rights to manage trade, taxation, and northern exportation of lumber, ore, and fur for 10 Braavosi years. 10 years. They wanted to own the North's heart for a decade. Robb's hands clenched around the scroll until the parchment tore. No, he muttered, but the Iron Bank didn't ask for approval. It demanded compliance. In the great hall, Catelyn stood from her seat with fire in her eyes. "You gave them the crown," she said, voice shaking. "But now they want your soul. You promised the North freedom, and now you're handing it to foreign men who don't even know our gods." Robb slammed his palm on the armrest. "I didn't come this far to hand them my home." "And yet," said a soft voice from the shadows. Pettier Baelish stepped forward, smirking. "That is precisely what you did, my king." Robb glared. "Say what you mean, Baelish." "I always do. You borrowed gold. You bought blood. You won the war. But you forgot one thing: the Iron Bank never loses." He tilted his head. "The Lannisters fought their enemies. You're trying to appease yours." Outside the capital, the mood was turning. Lord Karstark had vanished, taking half his men with him. Rumor had it he'd returned to the north and sealed his gates. House Umber sent no word. Even Lady Mormont refused to answer ravens. The old houses had bled for the young wolf, but now they began to wonder who he truly served. In the black cells, Cersei Lannister laughed, loud, mocking. When Robb came to confront her, she didn't rise. "Now you see it, don't you?" she whispered. "You weren't the end of House Lannister. You were its replacement. They needed a new debtor, a new dog to hold the leash. They got one. A wolf with gold in his belly and rot in his eyes." That night, Robb stood atop the battlements of the Red Keep, snow coating his shoulders. Grey Wind sat beside him, tail still. The direwolf didn't growl anymore, didn't snarl. He watched, just like the bank did, just like the lords did. And Robb Stark, king in name, debtor in truth, felt the crushing truth settle into his chest. He hadn't saved Westeros. He'd only sold it slower. The next morning, the North answered. A raven arrived from Winterfell, the seal of House Reed. It contained just 3 words. The pact ends. The North was breaking away. They would no longer follow the Iron King, and Robb's war for the crown had just become a war for his home. The ride north was silent. No banners, no drums, no processions. Just Robb Stark, cloaked in gray and black, riding ahead of a small, loyal escort of Northerners, those who hadn't abandoned him. His crown had been left behind in King's Landing. The gold weighed nothing compared to the shame curled in his chest. The Braavosi didn't stop him. They didn't need to. They had what they wanted: influence over the throne, trade routes in the south, and a capital filled with their scribes, their ships, and their contracts. Robb was no longer their investment. He was their liability. Let him return to Winterfell. Let him fade. But the North wasn't ready to forget. He passed silent villages, burned watchtowers, and banners that had once flown for House Stark now blackened or torn down. Snow muffled everything. Children stared at him without recognition. Old men looked away. No cheers. No prayers. He arrived at Winterfell, not as a king, but as a man seeking something he no longer had a claim to. The gates opened slowly, like the old castle was deciding whether to let him in at all. Inside, Lord Howland Reed waited, small, weathered, calm. Behind him stood Mage Mormont, 2 Blackwood Knights, and Lady Barbary Dustin names that once stood united behind House Stark. Now they stood apart. Eyes cold, Robb dismounted alone. He removed his gloves and approached Reed. "I came to explain," he said. Reed tilted his head. No. You came to ask for forgiveness? Robb didn't speak. Winterfell doesn't belong to Braavos. Reed continued. And it no longer belongs to kings who forget the face of the old gods. You sold the South. Robb, you let wolves die, while Braavosi filled your ears with coin. Now you come north not to lead, but to beg. I didn't have a choice, Robb said, his voice low. The Lannisters would have crushed us. The Freys betrayed us. We had no gold, no allies. You had us, snapped Mage Mormont. And you traded us for mercenaries. Barbary Dustin stepped forward. You call yourself Wolf King? You're not even a Stark anymore. You're a borrower with a sword. Robb flinched like he'd been struck. He looked up at the broken towers of Winterfell, his home, the seat of the wolves. But it felt unfamiliar now, empty, like it knew he'd traded it away long before the letters from Braavos came. He turned toward the Godswood. No one followed. The snows that were deeper. The heart tree stood tall, red leaves shaking in the icy wind, eyes bleeding old sap. He knelt before it, silent for a long time. I did what I thought I had to, he whispered. The tree said nothing. Gray wind appeared beside him, resting his massive head near the roots. His breath came slow, steady, loyal to the end. Robb closed his eyes, and then a voice behind him, soft, trembling. Why did you come back? He turned. Sansa, older, sharper. She wore furs and armor now. Not as a lady, but a Stark. Her red hair blew like a banner in the cold. I came to fix it, Robb said. You can't, she replied. I have to try. She walked toward the tree, not toward him. The North doesn't need a king. It needs a protector. Someone who remembers what it means to kneel to no one. Robb felt those words settle like a blade in his ribs. I lost that, he said. I let them own me. Sansa finally looked at him. Then take it back. He stood slowly. No crown, no gold, no army. But for the first time in years, he felt like a Stark again. Back at the gate, Lord Reed was waiting. If you want Winterfell, Robb Stark, you must fight for it not with Braavosi gold, but with your father's name. Robb nodded. I'll fight. Snow howled through the courtyard of Winterfell as Robb Stark stood atop the walls, cloaked in direwolf furs, his breath curling like steam in the frozen air. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the North pressing down, not in. Shame, but in duty. A familiar, old kind of weight. The kind his father once carried like armor. Word had already spread. The king had returned not with gold, but guilt. Not with titles, but truth. And the North, bitter and proud, listened. It started slow. A few houses sent envoys. House Chewin, House Glover, even a few Thens from beyond the wall. They came not for politics, not to restore a crown, but to hear what the boy king-turned-banker had to say. Some came armed, all came suspicious. Robb met them in the hall without ceremony. I won the war, he told them plainly, but I lost myself. I lost you, and I lost the North. A long silence. Then Lady Mage Mormont stood. So what now? You want forgiveness? No, Robb said. I want redemption, and I know I'll die before I earn it. That answer honest and stripped bare reached. Places all his gold never could. Outside Winterfell, Braavosi riders arrived. They came under the banner of parchment and net. Not war, but everyone knew what their presence meant. The Iron Bank hadn't forgotten. Their ledgers showed the North as collateral, and now they wanted what was theirs. They brought terms. Control of Wintertown, 10% tax on all northern trade, exclusive rights to White Harbor shipping lanes. Robb burned the paper without reading it aloud. The Braavosi emissary was calm. A contract cannot be voided by fire. Robb stared. At him, neither can the North's will. Behind him, the lords and ladies of the North stood, wordlessly, united. Winterfell barred its gates. No gold, no scribe, no contract would ever rule them again. But war was coming. A quiet, cold war, not of massive battles, but of strangled supplies, frozen trade, and silent assassins. Braavos would not invade with armies. They would bankrupt the North, isolate it, bleed it with 1,000 invisible cuts. And so Robb prepared not to fight like a king, but to endure like a Stark. He rebuilt the old ties. Ravens flew to thee. Free folk, to the Vale, to Bear Island, and even to Mira Reed in the Neck. The North began to hum again, like a heart remembering its beat. Small folk who had gone silent during the Iron Rain returned to Winterfell's gates with carts, wood, and stone. Sansa took control of trade routes through the Vale, using her Littlefinger-forged mind to outmaneuver Braavosi middlemen. Arya returned from the shadows, not as a girl, but a ghost with knives, and quietly began to remove Braavosi spies, who thought the North was still sleeping. Even Jon Snow now, a commander at the Wall, sent word. The North remembers. And the Wall stands behind it. And Grey Wind? He roamed the woods, no longer a beast of war, but a sentinel quiet, untamed, watching. Then, one morning, the final raven arrived. The Iron Bank declared default. No more patience. No more warnings. They would move to claim Wintertown by force, with Braavosi sell-sails already massing near the eastern shore. But they underestimated one thing. The North had already been sold once. It would not be sold again. Robb rode out with no crown. No throne, just steel, snow, and silence behind him. His people followed, not because he was their king, because he was their Stark. The sea turned black with ships. The sky turned white with snow, but between them stood the wolf. And the North did not kneel.